Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings here on Now TV. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I just really appreciate you being with me. I appreciate the increasing number of views. I appreciate the increasing number of comments. Now, I'm going to say this again. I've said this before. I do not have a problem in the world with someone coming on my YouTube channel and disagreeing with the things that I say. If you have good reason for challenging what I present, then present it in a respectful, courteous, decorous manner. Do not come on my YouTube or my Facebook page and call me a liar, call me a deceiver. I'm not going to tolerate that. All right. Just recently, within the last couple of weeks, I had this individual pop up on my YouTube channel and begin to call me a liar, the spawn of the devil, so to speak. Didn't use that term, but that was the concept. And just repeatedly impugn my integrity. You know, I was once a very arrogant young minister. I thought I had all the answers, and if you didn't believe me, all you had to do is ask me, and I'd tell you I did. um, but the Lord has a way of humbling us if we will accept the message. Well, I did. And while I believe very strongly in what I teach and what I say, what I write in my books, I am very definitely open to correction. But when I see manifested what I once manifested, it is truly abhorrent to me. It's really objectionable. The use of sarcasm is sometimes permissible unless we're impugning someone's integrity. The New Testament writers very often use sarcasm, irony. Okay, that's fine. But again, when someone comes on my channel and begins to call me everything except a Christian, to accuse me of not loving the Lord, of being a liar, being a deceiver, being a false teacher, without offering really any attempt at substantive exegesis, then I object to that. I won't tolerate it. So that's just a fair warning. Now, one or two of these individuals that have done this somewhat recently give what they think are some reasons, but they're not. So they're welcome to offer their reasons for believing that what I teach here is wrong. They are not welcome to engage in this caustic, vituperative verbiage, accusing me of knowingly teaching error, of being a liar, being a hypocrite. Once again, I will not tolerate it. So, fair warning. Well, I won't go anymore. That's enough said. Okay. Folks, we continue to examine the doctrine of the challenge of Christ. The challenge of Christ is very clearly enunciated in John chapter 10, verse 37. If I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me. Do not believe me for my words' sake, believe me for my works. That's what that teaches very clearly. It's undeniable. And yet some have scoffed at me for saying, oh, well, the challenge of Christ applies to eschatology. They can't answer it, so they just scoff at me and call me names, etc. So anyway, the challenge of Christ applies to Jesus's prediction in which he said The Son of Man is going to come in the glory of the Father with his angels, and shall reward every man according to his works. And verily I say unto you, there are some standing here. They were standing there 2,000 years ago, ladies and gentlemen. They are not alive today. But Jesus said, speaking of those alive, standing there that day, there are some, not all, and he didn't say just a tiny few handful, or he didn't say the majority. He said some. Now that does mean that a small number out of the huge majority that were there, doesn't tell us how many or how few, but comparatively speaking, it would be a small number who would not die until they saw the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Folks, that's the challenge of Christ. On Facebook recently, I've had individuals pop up and basically call Jesus a liar because his prediction to come back in the lifetime of that first century generation did not happen according to their view of it. So I've been involved in this study of the challenge of Christ for a good long while now, over 2 years. One of the passages that we have been focused on recently is Daniel chapter 9. And before we go there, I want to take note of the fact that the New Testament writers repeatedly tell us that the kairos, the appointed time, the time of the end, the eschaton, the appointed, divinely appointed time of the end had arrived 2,000 years ago. Now look, folks, since the appointed time of the end had arrived 2,000 years ago, you and I can't be in the time of the end. I mean, for crying out loud. The time of the end is never posited as 1,000 years, 2,000, 5,000 years. It's the last days. That's the time of the end. Well, I've said this many times. It amazes me, the manipulations, and I don't mean any disrespect, but it amazes me, the machinations that Bible students go through to salvage their futuristic eschatology in light of all of the New Testament time statements that the end was near. The appointed time had arrived 2,000 years ago. All of a sudden, they take positions, as I asked one former preterist not long ago, is it your view that not one single New Testament text uses time words of imminence in an objective sense of imminence? And he responded by saying, not one. Now, mind you, this same individual says in non-prophetic texts, in passages that are not dealing with the time of the end, the judgment, the resurrection, coming of the Lord, in those passages, those time words of imminence convey objective imminence. In other words, at hand means at hand. Soon means soon. Shortly, quickly, all those words mean it's going to happen soon. Oh, but no. We can't allow that when those same identical Greek words and the same identical Greek tenses is used to speak of the coming of the Lord, judgment, and resurrection. Folks, you will never find a more prejudicial, a more biased, a more unscholarly position than that. And yet, this individual, having abandoned the truth of covenant eschatology, knows that he has to destroy the time words of imminence that are used in regard to the coming of the Lord. So once again, he's got a hermeneutic, non-prophetic text that use words of imminence mean genuine imminence. But prophetic texts that use the same words in the same Greek tenses to speak of the coming of the Lord, judgment, and resurrection, they never, ever mean imminent. Never. As I have said on different occasions, that doesn't even make good nonsense. And it truly is an argumentum ad desperatum. Okay, so we've been pointing this out of how the New Testament says the appointed time had arrived 2,000 years ago. We've been examining some of the Old Testament passages that gave the appointed time. Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 9, Daniel chapter 12. We've been focused for a good bit of time now on Daniel chapter 9, 24 and following, where Daniel was told, Daniel is in the Babylonian captivity. It's the time of 70 years, which Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10 had said the captivity would endure for 70 years. That time is almost up. And Daniel is going, Lord, why haven't we been released? Why haven't we gone back home? So the archangel is sent to him to tell him, your prayer has been heard, Daniel. And here's the answer. 70 weeks are determined upon your people and upon your holy city. And 6 constituent elements are given in that response to put an end of sin, to make the atonement, to finish the transgression. And we've examined each one of those constituent elements to show here is Daniel predicting a 70-week, 490 year, that's a determined time until the Kairos would come. Do you catch that? Pardon. Oh, I hate hiccups. Anyway, so here's Daniel being told, Daniel, and notice this, 70 weeks have been determined. Now that word determined is from a Hebrew word, katak. I can't pronounce it properly, but you get the idea. K-H-A-T-A-K is the way it's spelled. And it means cut out. The sovereign God looked down through the stream of time and said, from here to here, in this divinely appointed time, I'm going to accomplish the following 6 things. And again, put an end to sin, make an atonement, finish transgression, seal vision and prophecy. Folks, you cannot get the fulfillment of these 6 constituent elements out of the 70th week. I know all sorts of people, many of them friends, who believe that the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9 ended in 34-35 AD or ended at the time of the stoning of Stephen. That's Kenneth Gentry's position, by the way. But I'm sorry, that simply will not work. And let me say this again. I have produced one of the most extensive studies of Daniel 9, 24-27 that I'm aware of. It is a DVD or MP3, or you can purchase it on disc or on Cruiser or on download, okay? Go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com, and just go to the store and look up Special Study of Daniel chapter 9. When did or will the 70 weeks of Daniel chapter 9 end? Again, I don't know of another study like this anywhere. I go into extensive detail, far more detail than I'm doing here on my morning musings here on Now TV, demonstrating that the 70 weeks could not have ended either at the time of Stephen's stoning or in 34-35 AD or at the sending of the gospel to the Gentiles. It doesn't work. So the 70th week gives us a cut out time, a divinely appointed time for the resurrection. I actually wrote a book. 70 weeks are determined for the resurrection. You see, that's what to bring in everlasting righteousness pointed to. The new heaven and the new earth to be brought in through the resurrection. So we'll get to that, all right? But I want you to notice, and last week was our very first lesson on this particular tenet. And it is 70 weeks are determined. Now, keep in mind, folks, this determined means cut out, which means divinely appointed. Kairos. There's no difference here, ultimately, in the meaning of these two concepts. The 70 weeks were cut out, determined, appointed by God. It was the appointed time, the Kairos. So last week, I began an investigation of this term, seal, vision, and prophecy. I read from my book, Seal Up, Vision, and Prophecy, which is from the good old King James. And I read for you multitudes of scholars across the entire spectrum of eschatological belief, demonstrating that there is a consensus. Is it universal? No, because different people try to avoid the power and the force of admitting that seal up vision prophecy referred to the final fulfillment of all prophecy and therefore the closing up, the sealing up of the prophetic office. So in today's video, I want to share with you some of those attempts to avoid the meaning of the final fulfillment of all prophecy and the end of the prophetic office. Now, I want you to think about this very carefully. If it's true, as the vast majority of scholarship agrees, if it is true that seal, vision, and prophecy refers to the final fulfillment of all prophecy, not just some, not a little bit of it, but all prophecy, and the cessation of the prophetic office, what does that mean? Well, it means that the coming of the Lord, the judgment, and the resurrection, and the new creation have all been fulfilled. And it means that which is perfect, the time when miracles would cease, has been fulfilled. And the miraculous gifts, including the prophetic office, has come to an end. This is serious stuff. This is humongous stuff. I mean, you can't get any more important than this. So attempts have been made, both by scholars and laymen alike, to say, well, it's not talking about all prophecy or the prophetic office. Well, technically speaking, yes, it means exactly that. It is to seal vision and prophet. That's the technical, literal of the text. And by the way, in this book, Seal, Vision, Prophecy, I go into great detail about what I'm going to share with you today about what is meant by vision and prophecy. Okay? So you need to get a copy of that so that you can go do your own in-depth study and see what it really means. So one of the attempts to avoid the force of this is to say, well, what Daniel's being told is that the singular prophecy of Jeremiah 29, verse 10, and that is that the Babylonian captivity would only last for 70 weeks. 70 weeks are determined to fulfill that prophecy. Well, the Hebrew word that is used for seal here means to shut up, to bring to its close. And you seal up prophecy and you seal up prophet by bringing the prophetic office to its close through the fulfillment of prophecy. But here's the point you have to catch. And again, I document it fully in my book. In the Hebrew of Hebrews chapter 9, verse 24, there is no definite article, and it is not a singular seal a vision or seal a prophecy. No. Let me reiterate this. This is not seal up the vision or the prophecy as if it were referring to a singular vision, a singular prophet or prophecy. No, no. This is to seal vision, not a vision, not a specific vision, but to seal vision, prophetic vision, and prophet. Not a singular prophet, i.e., as in Jeremiah, but to seal prophet and prophecy. So, from a linguistic perspective, and by the way, once again, in my book, I document the linguistics from citing a host of some of the greatest linguists that have ever lived, both past and present. There is no question about this. I've got to say this. I was in a formal public debate with David Hester, Church Christ minister, some years ago in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I made my first affirmative argument on Daniel chapter 9, 24 to 27. I had asked him when all prophecy would be fulfilled. He said the end of time. But I also asked him when was the 70 weeks of Daniel chapter 9 fulfilled. And he said in the first century. Well, he didn't realize it, but he had handed me the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. So I got up and I pointed out that according to the world's greatest linguist, there is no definite article in Daniel 9:24. It is not seal up the vision and the prophet. Unbelievably. And look, I had researched this and researched this and researched this. I knew that I was on absolutely safe ground. Look, I don't know one letter of Hebrew from another. As someone said, it's all hen scratchings to me. So I knew that I was on sound scholarly ground to say there is no definite article. But amazingly, Brother Hester got up and said, no, I'm sorry, that was not David Hester, that was another man. I apologize for that. Church Christ minister, nonetheless. So anyway, he gets up and he says, Don is just simply wrong. There is a definite article in the Hebrew of Daniel 9:24. I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned. I had cited Kyle and Delitzsch, Young, and a host of other, once again, of the greatest Hebrew linguists in the world, all of whom said there is no definite article. And here is this man who doesn't know the Hebrew, by the way. I'm sorry, I forgot to give you. His name is Tommy Thrasher. Real nice guy, okay? But here he is, he does not know the Hebrew, saying that all of these top linguists who are just simply looking at the letter of the text and who say, no, there's not a definite article. And Thomas Thrasher says, yes, there is. Well, interestingly enough, a friend of mine sitting in the audience had his Hebrew text in front of him. And he's sitting there going like this all the time that Brother Thrasher was saying, there is a definite article. Well, I got back up and I read several more quotes from my book from some of the top Hebrew scholars in the world. And I asked him to give me his documentation, give me his proof from the Hebrew that there is a definite article. Now look, he knew that if Daniel chapter 9 was talking about the end of all prophecy, the end of all vision through fulfillment, he knew his position was absolutely lost. So what did he do when I challenged him to get up and to show us from the Hebrew that the definite article is there? Well, he did the Passover. Did not utter one single word of response. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So my point here is, when people want to say, as many scholars sometimes do, in spite of the fact that the definite article does not appear in the text, they say, well, Daniel was being told that the specific prophecy of Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10, is what the angel was telling Daniel would be fulfilled at the end of the 70 weeks. And by the way, that by doing that, they are saying that Jeremiah's prophecy wasn't fulfilled within 70 weeks, but it was delayed, postponed for another 490 years. No, the children of Israel returned from Babylonian captivity in 70 years under Cyrus. Just read Ezra and Nehemiah, Nehemiah chapter 1. Children of Israel were allowed to leave, go back to the land of Israel, and to even rebuild the temple. So I'm running out of time very, very quickly here. But I have to drive this home. When people try to argue that Daniel chapter 9 is not talking about vision comprehensively speaking, it's not talking about prophecy comprehensively speaking, then they must be able to prove definitively from the text, from the context, that vision and prophecy had a definite article either demanded or implied. But you see, here's a problem. Jeremiah's prophecy did not include the making of the atonement, the putting away of sin, finishing the transgression. You see, finishing the transgression had to do with the time of the captivity. Israel didn't fill up the measure of their sin during the captivity. That happened before the captivity. On and on. The reasons just don't add up, ladies and gentlemen. And look, I'm almost out of time, but I hope you can see the point. Daniel was told seal, vision, and prophecy was referring to all vision and all prophecy to be fulfilled by the end of the 70th week. I'll see you next week.